It is 6 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order on April 23rd. First thing on the agenda, let's do roll call. Your microphone is to your right.
Okay, roll call. Commissioner Ferguson.
Here.
Commissioner O'Neill.
Present.
Commissioner Ashbrough.
Present.
Commissioner Wiley.
Here.
And Chairman McLean.
Here. Thank you. Our next item is the consent agenda. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes? Does anybody have any changes or concerns? If
I
not,
move for approval, Madam Chairman.
I would take a movement. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. And we're ready for a vote.
Commissioner Ferguson.
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill.
Yes.
Commissioner Wiley.
Yes.
Commissioner Ashbrough.
Yes.
And Chairman McLean.
Yes, consent agenda has been approved. Okay, before we move on to the public hearing, we have a very special presentation to make to Planning Commissioner Heather Wiley, who is moving on to become a council person. So we're very excited and sad at the same time. So Heather, if you want to join me up front. Well, if you do, I will. So on behalf of the Planning Commission, we would like to offer you this plaque for your service, and thank you so much for all of your insights and your helpful research. Thank you.
I'm gonna miss you, though.
Congratulations. Thank you. You know, we're excited. Thank you.
Much success.
Oh, that's a good picture. Stay there.
I'm gonna miss seeing you guys on Tuesdays. This group has been a great group. It's been a good group of commissioners.
We'll still be here. You can come and
You can watch us on TV.
Yes. I'll be around. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
thank you again. We're going to miss ya. Okay, first case on our agenda is case number 24-320-02, final plat, Waiters Place. A replat 8A at 816 North Powell Road.
That was part of the consent agenda.
Oh, sorry, you're right.
We already voted on that.
Case to be continued. Case number 24-200-04, a special use permit at 801 West 23rd Street. A request by Unity Center of Independence to operate a group home has requested to be continued. May I have a motion?
I'll move this, case number 24-200-04, special use permit, 801 West 23rd Street.
I'll second that.
Ready for vote.
Commissioner Ferguson.
Yes.
Commissioner Ashbrough.
Yes.
Commissioner Wiley.
Yes.
Chairman McLean.
Yes.
And Commissioner O'Neill.
Commissioner O'Neill, yes.
Case to be continued until the May 14th, 2024 meeting has been approved. Thank you. Okay. That's our meeting for tonight. Now we're ready to be trained.
Oh, yes. You have a presentation?
Thanks for coming.
Is that the clicker? Thanks. You tell me when you're ready.
Oh, we're ready.
Heather
Sorry.
Wiley, you go, girl.
Yeah, you like me. We are ready.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Jeremy Cover. I'm the city councilor, and I am here tonight to give you what's sort of a follow-up training. We've got this is a training that I have done with the commission before, but we have two new commissioners since the last time that I did this, and given the agenda for tonight, Rick thought this would be a good opportunity to do this one again. So we're going to get started. Obviously, this is interactive. So if you've got questions we're going through between myself and the planning staff, we can certainly address those. But as you'll see, a lot of this is just kind of things to think about going forward. So again, the purpose of this is to run through the city's Unified Development Ordinance, which is Chapter 14, which governs what the different functions that you all serve. So today I'm gonna run through this. I don't expect anyone to memorize it, or there's not going to be a test at the end. But hopefully it will kind of plant some flags in your brain when you're seeing things, and also that the presentation itself will serve as a resource for you. It's kind of a guide, and so that if you've got questions, or if you're looking at different applications, are we good? Okay. If you're looking at different applications, that you can go to this to kind of figure out where in the code to go look for certain things. So again, it's not so much using it tonight or at any specific meeting, but just as a resource going forward. This kind of breaks down the UDO and gives lots of different information on that. So okay, we're going to kind of start at the beginning where we have development getting going with pre-application conferences. So pre-application conferences, the point of those is to address issues before they get to you all, right? That staff goes through an application with an applicant to make sure that they've got what they need, to make sure everyone's on the same page. Now in the end, staff may or may not be recommending in favor of whatever they're looking for. That they'll go through that process. But to make sure the applications are complete, to make sure they're applying for what they really need and what they really want. Because what we don't want is for someone to go through a process and realize they can't do what they thought they could do with a certain designation or a certain permit. That's frustrating to them. It's frustrating to us. We don't want to waste anyone's time or money, and so we want to make sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of what we're getting going with when they start any application process, and so that's what that's for. Obviously, when they're going through that process, they're making sure that the application itself is in conformity with the UDO. Again, some of that is very clear to staff in terms of what, if you've checked this box, that works, and if you haven't, then that doesn't work. And some of those things, not being complete or not being consistent with the code may prevent it from coming to you all in the first place. And that's just, again, part of them, planning staff doing their jobs, making sure that what's coming in front of you are complete applications for whether that be for rezonings or permits or text amendments, whatever it is, and that it's complete and accurate when it gets to you all. General requirements for applications for rezoning, special use permits, site development plans, and preliminary final plats are all, those things are all in the code. Again, if you haven't just kind of browsed through the UDO, I encourage you to do so. There's a lot in there. It's certainly, intentionally a very comprehensive, very detailed document because it has to be. If you'll find that to the extent there are things that aren't addressed or are a little, left slightly vague, that's, undoubtedly where we get questions and issues, because, things weren't as clear as maybe we thought they could be. Submission of technical codes. So the Community Development Director, who is Tom Scannell, can require applicants for development or permit approvals to submit technical codes as may be necessary to enable the Planning Commission, City Council, or staff to evaluate applications. And so we've seen that before, with traffic studies and engineering studies, where essentially if there's a potential issue, that's a requirement that we can put on them where they have to pay for that to, in order to make sure that you all have all the information that we think you need to make a decision. Public notices. Okay, so there are 3 types of public notices. There's published notice, there's mailed notice, and there's posted notice. So in case it's not clear, published notice, at this point in time is still actually done in the newspaper, right? That's a published notice. A mailed notice is exactly what it sounds like. That's something that is mailed to anyone who's entitled to notice. And then a posted notice is something that actually goes up at the property itself. So sometimes, if you all are out driving around, or if you specifically go to a site to look, you'll see, there are certain, they'll have signs there. Sometimes you got to get a little close to them to read that, will tell you there, that this property is subject to a rezoning hearing or something like that. So those are actually posted notices. The types of notice that are required vary depending on what type of action they're pursuing, right? So for instance, if we're, and it's not just for applicants, for anything. So if we're trying to do a text amendment to the UDO, right? We're not going to go out there, where that applies to everyone. There's not a specific property at issue. There's not going to be a posted notice for a text amendment, right? But on the other hand, if we're doing a rezoning, there is going to be a posted notice, and oftentimes, again, depending on what action is being sought, there's a combination of notices that are required. Some of those are the city's responsibility, and some of those are the applicant's responsibility. So it depends on exactly what the notice is, and depends on who's responsible for doing that. Yes, ma'am.
What is the timing on posting typically?
I'm going to have to yield to planning staff for that.
Generally, it's 15 days before the planning commission meeting date.
Okay. And then is there a boundary, liquor license, you can't be 300 yards from a church, or you know what I mean?
So for the mailed notices, those are for all the property owners within 185 feet of the subject property.
Okay.
And so that could be if that 185-foot line crosses the property at all, even just by a few inches, they'll get a notice. And it does go to the property owner, not necessarily the actual address there.
Okay, thank you.
So those are the different types of notices, and again, those are things that planning staff is working on and looking at before it gets to you all to make sure, we want to make sure that when something comes to you all, that everyone who was entitled to notice got notice. Now, I will say, sometimes people think they are entitled to more or better notice than what they actually are entitled to. Okay, and everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but as staff, what we're looking at is what is required. And so that's what we're making sure of, is whatever the requirements are, that those have been met. And again, whether someone else may think that that's insufficient, that more people, wider area, certain, that those should also get notice, and we're not saying they shouldn't, but what we're looking at is what is the required notice in order to move forward, and that's what we're making sure has been met. Yes, sir.
What is your your source for information about ownership? When you're doing the mailing, what's your source?
So we use, the city has a GIS layer of parcels that it gets directly from the county. So it's automatically updated with the county's data. So as often as the county's updating their parcel data, that's what we use. And so whenever I get these distances or the addresses, what I do is I use a tool basically that automatically just grabs all the addresses within 185 feet. I usually try to help the applicants with that, because otherwise they're kind of have to sit on the parcel viewer and and figure it out. So
The average person wouldn't have no.
right. So whenever we can, we try to help them out and provide those addresses for them.
I should have asked a question a page ago. So,
I moved forward.
okay, not that one, keep going.
That one?
It was that one and the one before it, where it said the community director reviews all pre-applications and applications.
Uh-huh.
I'm just kind of I guess, curious. I see what comes across our vote for recommendations, and it seems like a lot.
Yeah.
So are others in the department also reviewing those? And two, what's the consequence if something gets missed? Like, what's the onus upon the planning directors? Is it a potential lawsuit by somebody filing? Is it
You want to?
a fine by some governmental agency? I mean,
Is your question regarding like notices or?
just the whole, the beginning of the process where somebody comes and says, I want to rezone, and so the community director it says the community director is the one to review.
Correct.
So along the way, is somebody else reviewing to make sure something doesn't get missed according to the law? And what's the consequences, or has there been a consequence?
I guess I'll kind of just go through an example. So anytime somebody comes in, let's say for a rezoning, we do have interstaff reviews all those, and we look at every case that comes in. Now, sometimes there are applications that come in that are not ready. Sometimes there are applications that come in and they change their mind for whatever reason. Now, as far as, I guess, if we miss something, really, if we miss something, let's say for the advertisement, for example, that's why, like in this case, we'll have the applicant postpone that case. So I don't know if we've ever had a situation where maybe we brought a case before this commission and something didn't happen. If that's the case, then we would have to either redo that case or like I said, have it continued to the next meeting to make sure something's been corrected.
One that comes to mind would be the Inglewood overlay. Half
Yes.
of the people said we didn't get notified.
Correct.
The
And in that
staff
situation,
thought they had based on the
yeah.
185-foot rule.
So what we get is we get an affidavit. So it is actually in the code the property owner's responsibility to send out the 185-foot notices. So we get an affidavit that says they did it. Now, if they didn't do it, the only time we'll find out is if, in a situation like
hearing.
that where, we found out, I think, right before that they didn't do it. And so that has happened. And in those situations, what we try to do is mitigate it by either coming back and saying we need to have that case continued to be able to correct that error. And really, I guess that's the resolve, is that it either just doesn't move forward or we pull it. Does that help answer that question?
Yeah, it seemed like a lot of responsibility in the way I read it there, that only Tom Scannell was reviewing these.
It's not just on Tom.
Yeah,
it
it's
is by code. It is Tom's responsibility.
Yes.
But as often you'll see, there's and sometimes it's language like community development director or their designee or something like
Yeah.
that. But so it ultimately it's his responsibility. But he can and I assume does have
Delegates that.
a number of people that he delegates different functions to in order to accomplish that.
And it's-
Otherwise, that would be concerning.
And if something gets missed, it's gonna get caught because of the other things along the way. You don't put it before us.
Yeah,
hearing.
generally we don't have those, but we usually try to catch them before they get here. But
I didn't want consequences for
Yeah.
them.
yeah,
I was just wondering if there had been, so,
Yeah.
anyway.
I have a question sort of along the same lines with the posting. So how do you prove if somebody says, well, you didn't post it on that day, I didn't, it wasn't out there? Or you just hope it doesn't never happen?
so generally we do take a picture of like when we stick. Are you talking about like the actual
Yeah.
at the property? We do take a picture of it.
Okay.
However, it is true that either they'll get pulled off, somebody runs over it, the wind blows it away. That does happen. But that is really, if we notice that and we go out, typically we'll go out sometimes even before the meeting to make sure that they're still there, and we'll try to repost them. But we usually take a picture of it every time they go out and actually do it. So that's, and sometimes you'll see that in the pictures when we're doing the presentations. You may not always see it, but we always do take a picture of it because that's really the only proof we have that we actually did post it on site.
So you're just required to post it, you're not required to,
Maintain
make
it.
sure that sign stays up for the entire?
You know, we do our best to
I'm
try,
sure.
but understand we have a lot of cases sometimes, and so we don't always get around to knowing that maybe it's gone.
Yeah.
And if we do know that, or somebody does mention to us that it's flying around the street or something, we try to go back out and fix it. But
Okay,
So in that case,
Yeah.
if somebody said it wasn't up and they take a picture showing it wasn't up, does that trigger a need to
yeah,
postpone?
yeah, we would then have to go back out and see what happened to it.
It would depend, I think, on whether or not that in and of itself, if they're reporting it, then theoretically they know something's going on.
About it.
Right. And, and maybe it was there, if they put it out the day before and this is the next day, and, so I think it could trigger that, but I wouldn't say it automatically triggers it just because it blows over and somebody points it out. I think it just, it's going to, depend on the situation. But, if they're, we found out that it got yanked out 2 minutes later and hadn't been there the whole time that we thought it was, well, that's a little different.
And I will add too, sometimes, especially with large properties, I'll use like North Point, for example. That's a big property. And, we have two different size signs, and I don't remember the actual dimensions. So we have kind of the more square one, and then we have the real big one. And, we do only have a budget to purchase so many. And so we try to post them in areas where people are more likely going to see them, even though it's a very large property. Sometimes we don't have the resources to post a whole bunch of signs, so we do our best. And in the case of what you're talking about, like the arts overlay, that's going to be a challenge because that's a very large area. And so we're going to have to strategically place those signs along the boundary, and it's probably not going to be in front of everybody's property. And so, but those are the types of things that we do try to work through, figuring out the best way. If it's a single-family lot, that's usually pretty easy. But when we get these large tracts of property, especially with like the industrial park, we do our best to put our biggest sign out there. And even then, sometimes it's hard to read when you're driving past it. So.
Any more questions on that? Or on notices at all? Are we good? Okay. Okay, so moving on to public hearings, which everyone loves. So public hearings, as I think you have all figured out by now, is the public's opportunity to provide input on a given application that is going through. The public hearings that you all have are actually, I would say, more important than the public hearings that that some other planning commissions have, because of this last part, which talks about new evidence. Okay, so as you all know, you're a recommending body, right? You're providing a recommendation to the city council. So, but what's important about your hearings is that at that point, everybody is allowed to come in and present everything they want you to hear about that particular issue, right? When it goes to the city council, so you then provide a recommendation, and that goes to city council. When it gets there, they technically have a public hearing also. However, by code, their public hearing only allows new evidence, or what we call on the agenda, new information, right? And a certain information has to be presented in a certain way in order to qualify as new information. And so for the city council. So what that means is the city council, almost every time, I think, occasionally we do have someone who does submit new information or new evidence to the council, but the vast majority of the time, they're relying on the information that comes over with the recommendation that you all provide. And that's not the case in a lot of cities. In a lot of cities, there's actually they do a full other public hearing at the city council meeting when they're considering it, okay? So they do a full public hearing at the planning commission, and then a full public hearing where everyone can get up there and talk and give their input at the city council meeting. And that's not the case here, which we think is great. We're all on board with that. But it means that it's even more important for the public hearings that you all have are even more important, because it is the only true open to everyone public hearing. When it gets to the council, again, unless there has been new information as defined in the code that has been submitted in the way that it's required, then the council is relying on the information that comes from that hearing and from your recommendation. Now, obviously, sometimes public hearings can get heated depending on what the issue is and who the interested parties are. It's our job to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard, and we want, people can have feelings and be expressive. It certainly, it can't get to a point where it's, attacking anyone, or it gets to a point where it's, not safe for people, or that you're not being able to conduct business, right? That's why, we have, certain limitations on how long that can go on for. But those public hearings are important. And like I said, in your case, even more important, because it's then limited at the city council level. So, that truly is, when people, and sometimes, it obviously makes a difference, and sometimes people, want to say what they feel about a certain issue, whether it makes a difference or not. So anyway, it's an important part of the process, and in your case, I think it's even more important because it's the only really true all-the-way public hearing in any given application. Okay, common issues with public hearings. So ex parte communications. So that means that ex parte means one party. So essentially, when we have a public hearing, the point is that you all are sitting up there and you all get the same information, right? There's a staff report that you all get that has certain things in it. There are, the applicant is typically there to speak on it, and then there's people who, may be for it or may be against it, right? And you all get to hear what that is. And everyone gets the benefit of that. Well, an ex parte communication is essentially a one-sided communication, okay? And ideally, we avoid those. But, an example, and I know this happens, is, somebody knows you're on the planning commission, and they, come up to you in the grocery store or something and say, hey, I saw, I don't know how often this happens, but it's possible. I saw this on the agenda, she's a liar, or, my dad, owns the property next door, you can't do this to him, or whatever, whatever sort of thing it is. So, my advice is certainly try to avoid those to the extent that you can. To the extent they're unavoidable, then, it's important that, you try to sort of shut it down as quickly as you can. And if you think it rises to the level where you need to let everyone know about it, then you would do that at the actual meeting. And I think, oh yeah, there it is. I figured it was on there somewhere. Disclose the contact for the record. So in other words, if we got up to that item on the agenda, you could say, even without naming someone, I wanted to let everyone know that someone, if someone related to the applicant came up to me and talked to the grocery store about this issue, I told them I couldn't talk about it, and that was the end of it, or something like that. Now again, if it happens, if they just if it's something kind of innocent and you don't think it rises to that level, I don't think it's necessary. But if a bunch of people saw you talking about it, or maybe it was at some sort of city function, and so people who may otherwise, know what's going on were, saw you and this person talking or something like that. That's up to you all, because obviously we're not going to know, if it happens. But that's kind of how, try to avoid it. If you can't avoid it, shut it down. If you think it's necessary, then let everybody know, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, and that no one will come back later and say, oh yeah, they had this whole thing planned out because I saw them talking about it at the grocery store. Okay, so those are ex parte communications. Prejudgment bias, that has to do with basically how you feel about something before you're actually at a hearing, before it's actually in front of you. So it's okay to be familiar with the facts, right? To know that this thing was out there, the application, the property, that's okay. It's okay to even say, hey, I looked in the packet and I know enough to think I'm probably gonna vote a certain way or something like that. But you still have to have go into a hearing with an open mind, because you haven't heard all the information, right? Because that's what the public hearing is for. And so, if at some point you had a situation where you felt like you couldn't, keep an open mind, well, theoretically that's the type of case you would recuse yourself from. But ideally, that's not something that happens very often. And so again, it's okay to have an inclination and say, yeah, in your kind of brain, think that's probably where I'm leaning, as long as you remain open, going into the hearing, that, hey, I haven't heard everything, and once I do, I'll make a decision. So that's what prejudgment bias is. And then conflict of interest. So there are certain required listed prohibited acts that you all can't do. They're in Chapter 105. I'm not going to go through those, but we can certainly talk about them more. I can send them to you. If you have a financial interest in the property, or you're related to the applicant or something like that, those are are conflicts where you would be expected to recuse yourself, right? If your spouse or child or somebody like that, or if it was the applicant was a company that you have an ownership interest in or something like that, the expectation would be that you would recuse yourself in order to make sure that we have and that's really in everyone's best interest, because what would happen is, if you vote on that, then you've kind of tainted the process, right? And so then, even if you felt like and maybe you voted against, maybe no matter how you vote, it could be perceived as well, you were too close to that and you shouldn't have voted. And so it's really in everyone's best interest to just take a step back. That's why we hopefully always have enough people here where, if you need to do that on a given application, that that's, to me, that's not a problem, and you should if you have a conflict. Any questions on that?
Jeremy, I would be interested in that, Chapter 105.
Okay, we can send that. Yep, we'll take care of that.
Thank you.
Okay, actions by review bodies and decision makers. So again, you all are a review body, right? For the most part, with most things, that you all are taking a look at it, providing a recommendation to the city council, who makes the final decision on that. What's important, especially in this situation, is you have to realize that the city council is, there's a lot of things that they're looking at, right? This is sort of one piece of it. So they, really they're expecting you all to do kind of, the hard work, the deep dive on these things, so that they don't have to, because there's a lot of things that they do a deep dive on, but theoretically they've got you all to do it on any sort of development issues and planning applications and that sort of thing. And so that's where, and in my experience working with them, they really do, they rely on you all. I think you'll see the vast majority of the time they go with your recommendation. So it really is a situation where they really need you all to really kind of dig in and make sure that you're in the know, and therefore they're in the know. Okay, so what can you all kind of do and not do? So review bodies can recommend approval with modifications / conditions, or recommended disapproval of an application, right, which I think you know. Recommend conditions or modifications if the effect of such is to allow a less intensive use or zoning district than indicated on the application. So you can go down, but you can't go up, right? And that's, you're going to see that again. Review bodies may not recommend a greater density of development, a more intensive use, or a more intensive zoning district than what public notice indicated. So you all are allowed to make modifications, but if the notice that went out, took it to here, right? You all can take it back here, but you can't take it up here because neighbors are like, oh, we're okay with this. But if you tried to go up, if the application was for something up here, then maybe they would have shown up, right? So you can go down, you just can't go up. And that applies to the city council also. When it gets to them, they essentially have the same options. But again, you can go down, but you can't go up. And that's to, so that, the application in theory, that's what they wanted. There's no good reason you should be trying to give them more than what they wanted in terms of a higher use or something like that. And again, it's also not fair to the public because if we noticed it up for one thing and then jumped it way up here, then and they didn't show up, because they didn't show up because that's not what you said you were going to do. So that's why you can go down, but you can't go up. Text amendments. Okay. So text amendments are something that are done periodically. Those are actual, changes essentially to the UDO, right? So those are changes that apply to everyone. They come about either, from, they can come from you all, they can come from the city council, they can come from staff. It just sort of depends on what the issue is. And those, the point of those is to change, something in the actual UDO that relates to how we're regulating, given thing. What's the most recent text amendment we've done?
I think the most recent one was the Nolan Road automotive use.
The what?
Nolan Road, the Miracle Mile one.
Oh, right. We got it. Yeah. So anyway, so those are review and recommendation by the Planning Commission. So we have a public hearing. You all then provide a recommendation to the City Council like you do on pretty much everything. And that goes to them. Like I said, that's another one where they're relying on you all to do the deep dive and to ask the hard questions, so that by the time it gets to them, they have theoretically an easier decision to make. Rezoning. So these can be filed, either by the actual property owner or someone representing them, or technically the city can. There are city initiated rezonings. I think typically. And Rick can correct me if I'm wrong, those are going to be, corrective rezonings or something, where we've seen that something doesn't quite fit in.
Yeah, correct. Typically, it usually starts because somebody is wanting to do a rezoning, which would be a corrective rezoning, and so we look at the surrounding area. And if we notice that there's a lot of, for example, single-family homes that are in commercial zonings, in many cases we'll turn that into a city-initiated rezoning, and then that way the applicant doesn't have to pay for it, number one. But at the same time, we can potentially get that entire area corrected.
So for rezonings, the applications have to include a vicinity map, a certified list of all the property owners within 185 feet, which we've already talked about, zoning, land use, and ownership of parcels within 185 feet, boundaries of property to rezone, and legal description, and then that's the type of, that does require a published, mailed, and posted notice. So you get the trifecta on rezonings.
So can rezonings also happen via the city to help guide or to help fulfill the strategic plan for Independence? So like if the strategic plan identified an area that really needs to be R6, or an area that's kind of got a few R6s in it and really belongs in an R12 or C2 or something like that, is that where this also?
You want to take this?
Well, it would probably more be associated with like a comprehensive plan.
Okay.
And generally with those types of things, we're going to have, public meetings, many public meetings in regards to what does that look like for the future area or corridor, for example. We do try to avoid like a forced rezoning because we don't want to, well, we just don't want to get into those types of things. But it is true, like when a city looks at a comprehensive plan and looks to see if this entire area, you know, is this good for multifamily, or is this good for residential, or is this good for commercial zoning? But generally, you've got many public hearings and public meetings that are prior to those types of decisions. Does that help answer that question?
Yep, perfect, thank you.
Okay, subdivisions, I'm gonna kind of scroll through because there's a lot there if you really care. But fundamentally, there's three types. There's preliminary plats, minor subdivisions, and final plats. And what each one has, you know, a different, you know, process, different, you know, level of notice and requirement. So I'm not gonna, I feel like that's really detailed. You know, again, that's all that information is there. If you're interested, we can certainly, you know, have that discussion with staff. But unless there are specific questions, I'm going to kind of roll through subdivisions. Anybody? Okay. Okay, planned unit developments. So these are what we call PUDs. And PUDs are really where you have a situation, and I'll ask Rick to kind of add to that, where regular zoning doesn't quite accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, okay? And so a PUD lets you sort of do some other things with a property that you know everyone's okay with, but wouldn't be necessarily allowed under, you know, with a just regular you know, type of, you know, standard zoning designation. Rick, what do you want? What can you add to help fully illustrate that?
Well, basically what I would add is, so, you know, for example, let's say somebody had a subdivision design and it doesn't necessarily meet the lot size or the lot frontage. In many cases, you know, people aren't allowed to just not follow the code. And so that would be that process. We can also allow certain other uses under the PUD that wouldn't normally be allowed under that particular zoning. And so, for example, we've seen that sometimes with, you know, allowing storage, for example, on a C2 property, and it really requires a C3 type of thing, but we don't feel comfortable moving it to a C3, so we can, I'm sorry. We can, like, for example, have a PUD. There's been situations where people want to maybe store vehicles, their commercial business, and they're in a C2 zoning, so their business is C2, but they want to store vehicles. We require a C3 zoning for storage of vehicles, but we can allow that with a PUD to allow the storage for that type of business, and it is specific to that lot. And so, and that's probably a good thing, maybe, because it's not a bad thing, for example, if that business is, that's part of it. But you can do that type of thing with the plan unit development. Plus, you can also change things like your setbacks, your lot sizes, and generally it's for different types of developments that are unique, that can add a different type of amenity to the city. And so those are, it's not a process that's designed for let's say a developer to just not follow our codes. There has to be, you know, a positive benefit to the public for those types of plans as they come forward.
So would a tiny house community fit into that?
So it would have to be a PUD, because the way our zoning code is set up with certain lot sizes, setbacks, for example, in many cases, small lots and small homes wouldn't meet that per the code. So it would have to come before you as some sort of plan unit development. And with the plan unit development, when you approve it, that is what you get. So they have to move forward with that. If they choose to change that, then they would have to come back before you. There are a few things that they can do without having to come before you. For example, if maybe an easement, for example, is less, if it changes it less than 10%, sometimes it's not possible all the time to do all the engineering. And once that's completed and we find out that a utility easement has to be relocated or something. But for the most part, the plan has to match what it is that came before this commission as well as council. And if they want to deviate from that, then they have to come back before and do that whole process over again because it's not what it is you voted on. But does that help answer that? Okay.
And I don't know, how many PUD applications do you think there are a year?
Gosh, I don't know.
I mean, I don't think there's,
I mean, probably.
I wouldn't-
I would say maybe 6,
I was gonna say,
something like that.
I was gonna say half a dozen. Well,
Yeah.
there's not one a month.
Yeah,
I
no,
would say,
no, there
so
isn't.
we're
No,
something,
there
you know,
isn't.
less than, so we're talking, 5 to 10 a year probably.
Yeah, something like that.
If I had to get,
Possibly. Yeah.
Okay. So again, it's something that's out there, but this is not something that's even on, clearly like on every, even you're seeing once a month. Special use permits. Okay, special use permits are a specific use within a zoning area, but you have to get special permission, okay? So it's where something is allowed, but we don't want to just make it so that everybody can do it. We only want to make it so you can do it if you get permission for it. I don't know, what's the most common?
Tattoo shops. Yep.
Car wash.
Here you go.
Set the buzzer.
So, there's a lot of things going on with that. So those are the type of things that do require, sometimes require special use permits. So again, they're allowed, but allowed with permission, and the permission is the special use permit. And the point of that is that, we're okay with it, but we're not okay with it just sort of unregulated, right? We want to make sure that we're, keeping some sort of limit out there, and that we know how many there are. Because if it's just allowed, then you could just do it, right? So if it requires a special use permit, that means you have to have an application and go through that process, and we know everybody who's doing it, whatever it is. So, okay. Site plan review. So site plan review is a procedure that allows for administrative review of detailed site plans to determine whether such plans comply with the city regulations and policies. So this is another function that clearly, that staff is doing with the goal of making your job easier, right? And so, they want to make sure that they've gone through everything and checked the boxes so that when it comes to you all, it's not just a sort of complete application, but that it's in a way that it's relatively as easy as possible for you all to review it and make an informed decision and make sure that you all have all the information that you need in order to make that decision and recommendation to the council. Again, and that's essentially done at every level. I don't know. You guys want to add anything about that? That's all you. So.
I was gonna say I really don't have anything else to add to that. No.
Appeals of administrative decisions. So, under the code, and I'm going to say this, and I'm going to add some context. Unless alternative appeal process is specified by the development ordinance, that says the Board of Adjusted, it should be adjustment. The Board of Adjustment may hear and decide appeals where it is alleged there is an error in any order, requirement, decision, or determination made by an administrative official of the city in the administrative and enforcement of the development ordinance. So if you have zoning, let's take a step back. If you have zoning, in Missouri, you are required to have at least a planning commission, right? In most cities, they call it P&Z, planning and zoning. Here, you all call it just planning commission, but it serves the same purpose, right? So in Missouri, if you have zoning, and I certainly recommend that all cities have zoning, then you have to have a planning commission, and you have to have what's called the Board of Adjustment, okay? So the planning commission, which is you all, is the ones that are reviewing applications and making this recommendation onto the city council, right? If at some point in a given process an applicant feels aggrieved by something, okay, and that wouldn't necessarily just be that wouldn't mean they don't like the answer you give them, but there are obviously a whole host of other functions that go into this. Then they can appeal to what's called the Board of Adjustment. And the Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial body, okay? Which means that they're essentially acting in a judicial capacity by, like a judge would, by taking the given regulations and the facts at issue and applying those together and making a decision. And what's different about the Board of Adjustment is that their decisions are final at the city level, and if you don't like what they say, then you actually appeal that to the circuit court. Okay? So Board of Adjustment decisions go to, and I don't know, I will say that doesn't happen very often, but it, in terms of appealing Board of Adjustment decisions, but it has happened. And, on the other hand, again, for the vast majority, with the exception of approving the comprehensive plan, what you all are doing is providing a recommendation on to the city council in order for them to make a decision. So those are essential. But you all and the Board of Adjustment are the two bodies that are required by law to have if you have zoning. And so generally speaking, the Board of Adjustment much less, and there's other functions they can perform as well. They're much less busy than you all. So it's not quite, I don't know who over here staffs the Board of Adjustment. But because Mitch also covers those meetings for the most part. But anyway, but it's sort of it's the other side. It's one of the checks and balances that are in place when you have planning and zoning. So that's just that's where that can come in. Permits, special event permits. So this is something that I don't know. I'm trying to think the last one that this group had.
I mean, typically it would be like Santa Caligon and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not something that is and a lot of those are done administratively, but it's something that you all might see at some point. Building permits are not something that I'm trying to think. There's never a scenario where they'd see building permits, and for the most part. That's all some stuff that's done administratively. If I'm trying to think, every once in a while, we have an appeal of a building permit that goes to the
Board of Engineering.
Board of Engineering,
yeah, and
which
appeals. I would say that like building permits in many cases are predicated on the decisions. Well, this body makes a recommendation. If it goes to council, let's say that they affirm that decision. That really is when the applicant can come back for a building permit. So those building permits are really predicated on the decisions that are made by this body as well as council in terms of the final decision. So, for example, if somebody if this body didn't recommend something and council affirmed that, then the applicant really can't come back and get a building permit for it if they didn't get approval for it. So. And if there were conditions attached to that particular application that they had to do something prior to or during the building permit process, that's where this body could have an impact on the building permit approval process. That help?
yeah, no, that's good.
Where we did permit was, I think, the hub sign recently.
Yes, yeah. For example, like the sign permits, what this body will see and what this body will approve has a pretty direct impact on what that applicant can come back for with a sign permit.
Yeah, it's a sign permit as opposed to a building permit. But yes, that is one that you all do see. Yeah, well, and if you remember, there was an issue with the sign for.
Yeah, there were.
Thank you. Yes, Cargo
Cargo
Largo,
Largo.
where there was a lot of confusion about what exactly that sign was, where it was, what way it faced. Yeah. So I think we had at least 2 meetings, if not 3 on that. Do we have 3? Was it 3? Okay. Yeah. So yeah, the sign permits is definitely something that you all will see from time to time. Certificates of occupancy, again, this is something that you all see. It's just so you kind of know what the terminology is. those are what is actually issued in order to occupy a property, as the name implies. Written interpretations. This is something that is sometimes provided by the community development director, and it's essentially, the idea is that if someone is considering buying a property or pursuing some sort of development and wants to know what exactly is going to be required, or wants to make sure they accurately understand what they see, they can ask for a written review and decision from the planning developer, just to kind of make sure they're all on the same page. It's not binding. It's it's essentially a staff opinion of something. So, and certainly if, to the extent anything requires, discretion from you all there, it's not that it's binding in any way, but it's to make sure that to give someone some level of assurance that yes, they're on the right track. And this is something, I don't think it happens very often in a formal way, but it certainly happens in an informal way regularly. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I would say a lot of times we may have an applicant that comes in and says, for example, I want this area over here, and I want to be able to, put in storage units or something. Maybe it's not zoned for that, and so they will want to confer with us as to, what are the possibilities. And obviously we can't guarantee anything because we can't guarantee the decision of this body and or council. But a lot of times what we'll do is we'll let them know that, currently this site is either zoned for something or not a zone for something, and what that process that they would have to do in order to achieve what they're wanting to achieve. And so that's kind of really where we would get into that written interpretation of what maybe that site is, or the question that they're trying to get resolved.
Well, and one of the points of that is not just to answer the question at issue for a given applicant or developer, but to sort of help the community development staff to know what has been said before and to be consistent, right? We want to be consistent. As attorneys, one of the places that we can go and look for things are attorney general opinions. So we can go and search and see, okay, what did the at some point has the attorney general's office issued an opinion on this, and those go back a long ways, and we can see, okay, yes, back Jay Nixon said said this about this issue, and it's another resource we have as attorneys, and that's sort of what that's there for, is to help them be consistent and see what has been said on previous certain decisions without doing other searches. So social media considerations. Okay, be careful. Let me say that if you have social media, that's fine. What I would so there's sort of two ways you can have social media. You can have it as a sort of personal page, or you can have it as what I'm going to call as a public official, okay? So if you have, a social, Facebook, or not Twitter, X, or whatever it is. I don't do much on social media. If you have a Facebook account and it's Virginia Ferguson, Independence Planning Commission member, okay, and you're out there posting all this stuff about, you're posting agendas, and you're, essentially kind of treating that as an extension of your service on this commission, then it's possible that that particular page is going to be treated almost like a public page, okay? Which means that, you can't just turn people off and unfriend people and mute people and hide things and do all that like you could on your normal page, right? If it's Virginia Ferguson, individual, it's, free for all on what you can do. Now, I still don't recommend that you make comments about agendas or anything like that, or pending items. I mean, my recommendation is that you keep it just separate. But and it's more of a stretch for you all. What you often do see it though is it's not uncommon to have Rory Rowland, mayor of Independence, and that's and he could have an official Facebook page and he's putting stuff out there. And so, with mayor and council, it's probably more common, but again, doesn't mean you couldn't do it. So the point of this is just to say, keep it separate, but ideally, if I were you, I just would keep all of that. To the extent you have social media, I would just not, I wouldn't include anything that's going on with the planning commission, because, and people are crazy. I mean, so, I just think it's an easy, by not doing that, it's a lot easier to just avoid all of that. It is something that we deal with regularly on official city accounts, where we have to, monitor things and remove things because they get abusive, and, they get spam, and they get, all sorts of weird and inappropriate things that that have to be monitored. And the more you put yourself and your account out there, the more likely that is to happen. So the city is essentially has decided that it's worth it to engage the public to do that with this official city accounts, and that's fine. My recommendation would be that you don't do that with your own accounts, but in the end, it's your call.
But conversely, it's also, I avoid commenting on like other people's pages who are talking about a situation that might come before us or have come before us. I just don't comment either.
And that's certainly my recommendation. Here's the thing. Once you put something out there, okay, I assume that anyone can see it and it's there forever. Okay, because you don't know, even if you can go back and delete it, you don't know who's already seen it. You don't know who took a screenshot of it, right? You don't know how it's going to be taken out of context. There's just, so my recommendation is you just, on social media, you avoid anything having to do with planning commission business is my recommendation.
So stick with grandkids and food.
Stick with grandkids and food. You take all the pictures of avocado toast you want, but steer clear of the, huh? Or avocado tostadas. Yeah, I'm all for it. I like avocados, so anything with avocados. That would be my recommendation. In the end, it's a personal decision. It's up to you all. But I recommend that you, to the extent possible, just avoid any planning commission business on your social media accounts to the extent you have them and use them. Sunshine Law. Okay, so I'm going to assume that everyone has heard of the Sunshine Law. So I'm not going to go into a deep dive, but because I could, but I won't. So, the Sunshine Law is the sort of the common term for Missouri's open records laws. And it applies to you all just like it applies to the city. Now, what that means is that any official business that you all, this is all open, right? People can be watching, and any your packets and all of that those are all open records, right? Anyone can go online and get those. If it's not available online, they can submit a records request to get them. But that also includes emails, and it's not you're not giving up if you're sending an email to planning commission staff from your Gmail account. It's not that we can go in and search your Gmail account, but once it comes to a city account, any city accounts, again, within reason, there are some exceptions to what's an open record and what's not. But fundamentally, if you send anything to a city email account, you should assume that it could get out either intentionally or accidentally. Because again, those are all once they're on the city domain, they're in the city servers, and it's associated with a city email account. Then if someone does come in, and I've reviewed a lot of records requests over the years, and it's interesting sometimes the things that get caught even accidentally when you do, and we get a lot of email records requests for emails here. And so a lot of times the most interesting ones aren't things that are even part of the search, but because of the criteria that we use, something pops up. And again, unless there is a specific exception that allows us to close it, if it's responsive to a records request, then it's going to go out to a requester. And so anyway, so again, that doesn't apply, so it's not that anyone's coming in and searching your personal email accounts, but once it's interfaced with the city email at all, then it's fair game for a records request. So keep that in mind. That also means that we don't do, like on emails, for instance, that we can't have an email string that has you all on it and you're voting on things or something like that. Those are all things that aren't allowed by the Sunshine Law. So we need you to vote on something. We're gonna have a meeting about it. So any questions on that?
Or talk about cases on the thread, and none, we can't do.
Right, you can't do any of that. So even you all, not just voting, that's a good point. Not just voting, but what we can't even have, what you all are doing is open to the public. And so an email string is not open to the public, right? You all can't have a quorum of you all, which let me remember.
4.
4. So 4 or more of you cannot be on an email string or a text string or anything or in a chat room, if that still exists. I don't know. I mean, our chat room's gone, I think. I don't know. I'm not that guy. You can't be having any sort of communications with it because once there's 4 of you, that makes a quorum. And so, that doesn't, 2 or even 3 of you can have a conversation, about something generally, as long as the point of it is not to avoid a quorum, right? You can talk about when, and certainly there's often, hey, when was that meeting? Or do you remember what was talked about? Or something, hey, is that still happening next month? I mean, that's all perfectly fine and normal. What we can't do is, the chair, it can't go around and meet with each one of you individually in an attempt to know kind of where you all stand on something in order just to avoid having you kind of vote, out in public, right? Because what you all are doing is public and the public has the right to know. And so we want to make sure we protect that and we're, following that law. So again, it's not something that it's something that we need to be cognizant of for you all, but it's not something that has been an issue in the past, and I don't see it being a big issue going forward. Any questions on that? Okay, that was our last one. So the email addresses there are for myself and Lindsay Gallman, who's our paralegal in the law department. Obviously, I think you have Planning Commission contact information, but the point of that is to give you, our email addresses. So if you've got a question or an issue, and certainly you can, find other ways to contact us if you want, but you can do that. As far as I'm concerned, the Planning Commission or the planning staff is doing all the technical hard work on the different things that are coming before you. But if you've got questions about procedure or conflicts or meeting issues or anything like that, you're certainly welcome to talk to me and we'll get it figured out. So anybody have any final questions? Okay, then that's all I got.
Thank you. I always find the trainings helpful in reminding. Transparency is important. Staff, I just realized I forgot to do the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll do a double next time. And to the right flag. Yes. You guys are never going to let me live that down. I swear.
I stood up to do it, but,
Well, you should have said, excuse me.
I don't know if they even caught that was.
I honestly didn't even catch it until you.
Oh, thank goodness. Anyway, any new business?
I did want to kind of answer some of your questions that you'd had. First on the short-term rental and, actually both of them are technically on the short-term rental. So we did look at different, there was a question regarding some of like the homeroom and what that is. And there were a lot of different websites that do that type of thing, but they're roomies.com, Zuper, homeroom, spare room. What they were, though, when we did go back and look, these were all sites that rent, let's say, one room, for example. Sometimes it'd be 2 bedrooms, but they were 30 days or more, so they really wouldn't fall under a short-term rental. So they were more long-term rental. So until those sites start actually trying to do something less than 30 days, it wouldn't necessarily fall under the short-term rental code. So we'll continue to look at those and monitor those, but as of right now, it would be considered a long-term rental, which we
So
don't
Rick,
regulate.
does that mean come World Cup that it's just not a factor? People can do whatever they want?
Yeah, I mean, as long as they're doing 30 days or more.
So, but they won't
yeah,
be.
yeah,
So-
it's
I mean, shouldn't we be proactive and provide a course of action or procedure on?
that would be a different. So that has more to do with a long-term rental, and you know, we haven't had. Currently, we're not looking at updating that code. Doesn't mean that we can't.
I'm just saying, I don't think it's long-term at all. I mean, I think people come in for 3 days of soccer games and stay in a room.
Yeah, and I don't know a better way to. So some of these sites are not monitored by our company,
Software.
and I'll be honest, I was surprised as to how many there were. And like I said, though, at least I will say all of them had 30-day rental requirements. So the application process as you went through were for 30 days. The prices were for 30 days or more. And most of them are like looking for mostly like college students and or medical professionals that are here for more than 30 days. And so, again, we'll have to see a better way to be able to monitor that. But at least for right now, like I said, that's how those websites are set up.
So is there something, to her point, that we want to be proactive about? Because they're not required, obviously, to get a business license. So there is no monitoring of this. So
Correct.
anybody could rent a room
Correct.
for any reason.
Yeah, and like I said, that falls under that long-term rental. And again, we've talked about that internally, about how do we want to proceed with the long-term.
So do we know what other cities have done?
Yeah, that's true. So they would need a landlord license.
Right,
That's true. Yep. Because even our long-term rentals do have landlord licenses.
that's true.
But the question is how do we prevent some of these websites from renting less than 30 days?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's other, is nefarious the right word? Reasons I think that maybe we should explore it just a little more and see what other cities.
Yeah, and
doing.
again, it's not like we will continue to kind of figure out how to make sure some of these sites are not doing things they're not supposed to do. I don't have a good answer as to how to prevent that right now, but that's why I just kind of want to let you know when we did look at a lot of these different sites, they were at least 30 days required on their
Yeah, I
applications.
was really surprised at how many.
Yep, there's a lot of them, and there's probably more, but our website wouldn't let me go to some of them because it blocked them. So on the fee or the penalties, we talked about that as well. So our actual code references section 14801 of the code, and so I did look at Shawnee, the other city. And one of the things that, and I did talk to Mitch about this because our code actually has a fine. Basically, the judge will determine what that fine is between $10 and $100. If it's a willful violation, then it's between $100 and $250, and it's that for each and every day that the violation is taking place. So it could be more than that. However, there are several things that kind of limit us. There are several state statutes that limit how much the city can take in from fees and penalties. And so it's Senate Bill 572 actually limits, it actually gives us kind of a graduated, for first offense, it's like $200, and then it goes to like 300, and then 400, and then 450 or something like that. Yeah, and so, and then I know it kind of works in conjunction with Senate Bill 5 that limits like revenues, your general fund. Yeah, for traffic violations, so you got to make sure that you're under a certain like 20% or something. And here, so I think they work in conjunction with each other. I'm not 100% on that, but
Yeah, you're right. I mean, if you remember, this goes back to Ferguson, Missouri, and all of the issues that were there with the municipal court. And so Senate Bill 5 was the first one that addressed limits on revenue related to minor traffic violations. And then Senate Bill 572 was the next year, and it got into the code and other kind of violations beyond traffic things and set up the graduated schedule that so yes, they work together.
so yeah, and we did used to have in our code, I think it was like a $500 minimum, but since those changes, we've had to update that. And so I noticed in the city that you referenced that they still had a $500 in there. And so I guess that'll be up to them to make any updates that they see necessary.
I don't need to know people getting fined, but I would be interested to know follow up on short-term rentals based on our noise violation and parties and things like that, if we're getting any complaints.
Complaints? I'm actually not aware of any that we've actually received. I mean, I can check into that, but I have not heard or seen that we have any actual complaints on some of the ones that we've approved. So,
Rick, what if there are like repeat violations? What's the action that can be taken?
so in our code, and I'd have to go back and review it, but if we do get violations, then I think it's like up to 3. They have to have 3, and then that would trigger a hearing to consider their denial of their approval.
Okay. Because I would assume that it's more of the noise violations in the neighborhood bother than the money, right?
Yep. Yeah, that was more of what happens if we have somebody that's willfully operating a short-term rental without coming forward to get the actual license. And one of the things, so when we put this code in place, we knew that there were people operating, right? And we wanted to give them an opportunity to come forward and actually get the appropriate approval license and then go through the business license approval process to do the proper inspections. We did not build in there some sort of penalty for already working. However, keep in mind, technically, the code does allow us to do that. And so if people are continuing to do that, then we would, in fact, go forward with that. Because we would have to write them a violation letter and go through that violation process.
I had a conversation with somebody in Kansas City who said that what they are starting to see is a real influx of out-of-state investors who are buying up cheap properties with the intention of, to get around the short term, doing long-term rental, and then the concern is the quick abandonment of those properties, and also bringing those properties like barely up to code or or whatever, and then abandoning them. And so I asked what they were doing, and they didn't have an answer. So have we kind of thought about that? Are we starting to see more of that?
Actually, I would say, and maybe you guys have, I mean, we do have short-term rentals applications coming forward. And I think, was it the next case we have like 3 of them? 3 or 4. And again, some of these are probably those that we've notified that are operating without a license. And then
Have
some
you
of them
thought
may not
about
be.
going with their application, building in the penalty for operating without a license?
Well, again,
Before they could
technically, the
bring it-
code would allow us to do that.
So why are we not doing that?
Again, if it's somebody that's willfully not coming forward to actually do an application, then yes, we would. I would say though, pretty much everybody that we've contacted that either has been operating without a license is going through the application process. If they have not, then they have actually stopped. And the only way we can actually do that is to make sure that they're actually no longer taking rentals on the websites that we monitor. So,
So it's really a case of us being able to monitor,
Yeah.
not a case of whether or not they're doing it or not.
yeah, because in the end, once we notice that they're doing it, when we send the notice, they could either stop or they can submit an application to continue it. And that's assuming that they can do that. We've actually had several instances where, based on the new code, they can't because they're too close to an existing short-term rental. So they really would have no choice but to stop, because even if they wanted to come forward, they could not do it based on the code because there's too many of them clustered, which is why we put in that code the distance limitation
feet.
to try to prevent, and it wouldn't just necessarily be outside investors, but also anybody, locally buying a lot of different properties like on a cul-de-sac, for example, to rent out that entire area. We wanted to make sure that we had them spread out the distance.
Is there any way, what do we require of long-term rental landlords?
So really, other than the landlord licensing process, that's really it. And we do the inspections of those properties to make sure that they're, and I will say that there's a lot of cities that don't even have that, to make sure that homes, for example, don't have mold or something inside of
Right.
them, or they're not, they're up to fire code. And we do have a lot of instances where people come to us, and we have a criteria that we have to follow in order to make an inspection in somebody's home. If somebody's renting a house, for example, and they say, this landlord's not fixing the water or something, or a hot water heater or air conditioning or heat, we do have a criteria that they have to follow. There's a process before our building inspectors can actually go inside somebody's house. But that is the process that we have for making sure that long-term rentals are renting out properties that are appropriate within fire code and things of that nature.
Maybe doesn't relate to us, but with all the talk of squatters and landlord rights, have we seen any of that?
So I have not here. I don't know if you guys have had, we haven't seen that here. Not to say that it hasn't happened. I know, I guess the way we see it is when somebody's not renting, or somebody's renting a house, for example, and then they stop paying. And we have an owner that is trying to remove somebody. That's what we've seen, not necessarily somebody going and breaking into a house and then claiming squatters' rights. So doesn't mean that it's not something that may happen. It certainly may, as housing becomes more and more expensive.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anything for the greater good?
How busy is our next meeting? Any idea?
So I think we have 4 cases, and I think all but one is a short-term rental.
There's a rezoning and
No, sorry, that was in 2 meetings.
Okay, so the next one, is it 3?
it's this continued case right here,
Okay.
and then a rezoning, and a
Special use for bed and breakfast, and then a short.
Okay, so we have 4 cases that are basically different. Everything's different. The one after that, I think, is the one that has like the 3 short-term rentals on it. So when you ask that question, we actually are like 3 or 4 meetings ahead of you because that's basically our schedule. So Yeah, so we're actually looking, not the next meeting, we're looking 2 or 3 meetings ahead of you already, so.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Yep. Thank you, thank you. He is gonna be sad. That's okay, I took good notes. He can read my notes.
No, I guarantee.
Love it. All right.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. This meeting is over at 7:24.